Following the discovery of the couple's partially mummified bodies in their home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, investigators are still looking for answers to their perplexing questions. The autopsy that I did on Mr. Gene Hackman took place on Thursday, February 27th. Gene Hackman, an actor who won an Academy Award, and his wife both passed away, and their deaths have been shrouded in mystery. In the midst of the majestic walls that surround Gene Hackman's house, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, discovers something that they had not anticipated, a concealed tunnel that extends deep beneath. However, as soon as they enter the building, their faces become pale. For all these years, what might have been buried beneath his house? The revelation of a secret that was so terrible and disturbing that it rendered even the most seasoned agents speechless. Listen carefully, because what they discovered will completely blow your mind. This is what the Federal Bureau of Investigation discovered inside Gene Hackman's mansion. At the time of their arrival at Gene Hackman's $4 million mansion in Santa Fe, the Federal Bureau of Inquiry, FBI, anticipated conducting a regular inquiry. Despite the fact that stories were always circulating about the estate, no one genuinely believed that there was anything extraordinary about it. The Hollywood star had spent his final years in a state of near solitude. Immediately, as the agents entered the building, that changed. For some reason, the house didn't feel quite right. In the beginning, it was not immediately apparent. Nevertheless, as they proceeded through the rooms, an unpleasant pattern became apparent. The estate owned by Hackman was magnificent and almost too perfect. Every item was in its proper location, and every surface was unblemished. Nevertheless, the minute particulars began to become more noticeable. It appeared as though someone had hurriedly left the room, since a chair was awkwardly positioned. Scuff marks were visible on the floor, giving the impression that something heavy had been dragged across it, but it was swiftly set back down again. There were some personal items such as books, framed pictures, and a tiny clock that were placed on the desk, but they were slightly off-center, giving the impression that they had been moved and rearranged in a hurry. The mess that was left behind was not the kind that someone would leave behind casually. These were the kinds of disturbances that gave the impression that someone had been searching for something or trying to conceal it. The agents dispersed themselves and then proceeded to search the enormous property. In addition to checking every room and closet, they also investigated the attic. Without a doubt, nothing stood out. In spite of this, their anxiety only increased as they proceeded further into the house. Upon closer inspection, the library appeared to be different. There was a sense of heaviness in the air in that room, as if it were concealing something from you. The library was one of the largest rooms in the house, and it was lined with shelves that were filled with old books and artifacts from Hackman's career to preserve his legacy. The kind of room that portrayed a man who had lived a long and successful life was present in this particular room. But the agents were not impressed by the interior design. They had their attention totally diverted to something else. One specific bookshelf, which was situated against the wall on the opposite side, appeared to be slightly odd. Despite the fact that it was not out of place, there was something about it that seemed out of place. While doing so, one of the agents delicately pressed his fingers against the edge of the object at the same time. Following that, it moved. There was a quiet groan that reverberated across the room as the bookcase swung inward, and behind it was a dark and tiny tunnel. Everyone on the team looked at one another. On the blueprints, this was not included. The entire estate had been meticulously documented, and each and every room had been inspected. It was not mentioned that there was any kind of secret entrance. There was no inkling that this tunnel was even intended to be there in the first place. Even so, it was already here. Hidden behind a wall of books is a secret door that has been well concealed. How come? Following the activation of their flashlights, the agents entered the building. There was a corridor that was confined, claustrophobic, and suffocating. The rough and unfinished walls of the room. The rest of the house had been meticulously planned out and tastefully adorned, but this room was not like the rest of the house. This area has an old-fashioned, even archaic feel to it. As they proceeded further, the musty, wet odor got more intense, as if the air had not been disturbed for so many years. A peculiarity could be observed in the manner in which the tunnel had been constructed. There was no evidence that the walls had been built in the same manner as modern wine cellars or basements. There was a thick layer of dust on some of the bricks, while others had a crumbly appearance on the edges. The bricks were old. It did not look like anything that had been installed in the house during Hackman's time there. It appeared to be years older. As they proceeded and continued to travel, the tunnel began to descend, carrying them deeper into the underground atmosphere. It was not merely a place to store things, there was a destination in sight for them. As they advanced, the agents began to become aware of further elements that were worrisome. There was a noticeable unevenness in the earth beneath their feet, as if it had been disturbed at some point in time. Have you seen anyone down here in the recent past? It wasn't simply that the walls were old, they were also marked. Strange symbols were carved onto the stone in a very feeble manner, ran from one side of the passageway to the other. The appearance of some of them was similar to that of crude sketches, while others appeared to have been etched with tools with great care. As far as I could tell, none of them made any sense. Afterwards, they made a more catastrophic discovery, a little piece of corroded metal that was just partially concealed in the ground. It was swept up by one of the agents with a motion similar to that of a dust brush. There was a key. And it was a really unique key. This one had a really detailed engraving, the borders of which were covered in symbols that were likewise found on the walls of the room. Not only did the individuals who constructed this tunnel leave behind a path, but they also left behind a mystery. The flashlights of the squad were able to detect something at the extreme end of the tunnel as it continued to stretch deeper. Is a door. This entrance was distinct from the others in the tunnel, which had an air of antiquity and uninhabitedness about them. This was a hefty piece of iron that had rusted over time. In spite of this, it was not a typical door. It did not have a handle, a lack of evident means to open it. It had the impression of being purposefully closed. There was a knock on it from one of the agents, and the sound reverberated throughout the tunnel. On the other side, it had a hollow appearance. It was possible that there was something beyond it, but whatever it was, it had been concealed for a specific reason. To be more specific, who was the one who locked it, and what exactly were they attempting to conceal from us? The search for any evidence of this tunnel on the surface was completed in a short amount of time by the investigators. After going through the estate designs once more, it was discovered that there was no mention of any underground route there. Not a single building record, not a single reference in any real estate documents, and nothing else, as if it were completely out of existence. Without a doubt, it was constructed by someone, but they managed to keep it a secret for the most part. A further turn of events followed. The land had been in the hands of many owners before to Hackman's ownership, which spanned several decades. Some of them had connections to the old Hollywood money, while others had connections to the government. Is it possible that this tunnel had been around for a time before Hackman even moved in? Was it a relic from a previous operation? A secret escape path? Or something even more nefarious than that? The discovery of the tunnel brought about a complete and total transformation in the search mission. In the beginning, it was just a regular search warrant, but it turned out to be a complicated riddle in and of itself. It was no longer possible to find what they had been looking for in Hackman's personal belongings. An attempt was being made by agents to piece together a more comprehensive puzzle that would lead them further beyond Hackman. In this mansion, the iron door, those symbols, and the disturbed ground all gave the impression that it was substantially more than a forgotten space. Furthermore, it had been utilized not too long ago as well. It had been enough of a mystery that Hackman had passed away. Suddenly, the scenario appeared to be much more unsettling. Indeed, the mansion was more than just a house. It concealed a much more significant secret, something that may have been concealed over the course of several decades under its many guises. The tunnel had been discovered by the FBI. I was curious about what was going to happen in the future. Hidden in the tunnel's ruins, the atmosphere within the tunnel was dense with dust, and it smelled like weathered stone and wet soil. During their descent further down the underground tube, the FBI detectives were able to see through the darkness with their spotlights, revealing walls that appeared to be significantly older than the mansion that was located above them. One may say that the tunnel was more than just a passageway that was concealed away, or anything that was concealed on purpose. The more they went down, the more evident it became that this region had been devoid of human habitation for a period of time that could have been decades or perhaps longer. However, the eerie silence was deceiving in its own way. Someone had been present, and they were highly noticeable, only recently. The passageway eventually opened up, and with it came the entrance to a room that was buried deep beneath the mansion. As the walls rose to a higher elevation, they vanished into the darkness above. Due to the fact that it was larger than anticipated, the area resembled an underground vault. The agents dispersed themselves, their beams of light flickering across heaps of wooden crates, rusty metallic objects, and peculiar antiques. Antiques. Without a doubt, this location had been utilized for storage purposes. Nevertheless, what exactly had been stored here? The question is, why had it been deserted? Upon opening the first crate, they discovered that it was covered in a thick coating of dust. The wood has become degraded over time. Within, there was a densely packed collection of yellowed papers, each of which had ragged edges and was sensitive to the touch. The passage of time had devoured some pages, yet other pages had not been altered in any way. The handwriting appeared to be hurried, even frantic, and there were passages that appeared to be irrational at one point. There were some that appeared to be personal confessions, written in a jumbled and agitated script, and there were others that documented transactions. Someone had been hurried, possibly even in a state of panic when they were written. These documents revealed hidden truths and information about something that was never intended to be revealed. As they continued to read, the agents began to feel an increasing amount of unease. Not only were these writings from the past, but they were also pieces of a puzzle that no one had ever put together beforehand. A small wooden box with a cover that could only just barely close was located next to the documents. As soon as one of the agents lifted it open, a stack of ancient photographs fell out and dispersed themselves across the dusty stone floor around them. The black and white photographs were examined carefully as they were carefully picked up by them. When they turned around, they saw faces that were strange to them, and their attitudes were unfathomable. A few of the photographs depicted clandestine gatherings that took place in dimly lit rooms where men were seated in silence and engaged in deep conversation. Others pointed to things that were not known to be there, regions that did not match any known landmark. Several of the photographs contained individuals whose identities had been removed, either by accident or over the course of time. The most unsettling ones were those that discovered items that did not correspond to the accepted historical periods, as well as instruments and machinery that appeared to be out of place when they were held by someone dressed in clothing from the early 20th century. The attention of my attention was drawn to a really spectacular picture. When compared to the others, it was preserved with greater care and was somewhat larger. The image displayed a group of individuals standing within the same room that the agents were already occupying. The walls of the tunnel that are located behind them are defined by the same marks and symbols that are etched into the stone. However, Hackman could not have been involved in whatever was going on here because the image was too old during that time. The repercussions were unsettling to consider. Prior to the construction of this tunnel, the estate had not undergone any significant modifications. This property had been in existence for a very long time before Hackman ever set foot on it. In addition to the cartons and papers, the agents found a collection of peculiar metallic objects, some of which had rusted to the point where they were unrecognizable. In spite of the fact that they were not contemporary tools, they had a level of skill that suggested precision engineering that was decades ahead of its time. Certain pieces of equipment featured complicated gears and coiled tubes, while others featured razor-sharp edges that gave the impression that they were not your typical pieces of machinery. At first glance, it appeared as though they had been constructed for a very particular function, which the agents were not yet able to comprehend. There was a pocket watch among the items, and the cover of the watch was adorned with some peculiar engravings. In contrast to the other metallic pieces, the watch had not rusted due to the fact that its glass had not been broken. On the other hand, the hands did not move regardless of which of the agents wound it up. It seemed as if time had stopped the instant it was used for the last time, as if they had been frozen at an unknown hour. Immediately adjacent to the watch was a collection of delicate jewels, objects that gave the impression that they had been once owned by a person of great significance. Which individuals had been the owners of these items, and how did they come to be concealed beneath Hackman's house?